Section 16 of Neighbourhood, A Year's Life in and About an English Village, by Tickner Edwards. The Tea Garden, August. Old Runridge's misadventure in wedlock has proved a trouble to more people than one in Windlecombe. In former years, though boating parties from the town were continually to be seen on the river when the August holiday season began, they seldom pulled up at our ferry stairs. From the waterside the village had a somewhat inhospitable look, while a mile further on there were the North Woods, Stavisham's traditional picnicking ground, where, at the gamekeeper's cottage, all were sure of a welcome. Such wandering holiday-makers as found their way into Windlecombe came usually by road, and were of the tranquil, undemonstrative breed, like pedestrians all the world over. There would seem to be something about sitting long hours in a rowing boat which is detrimental, even debasing, to a certain common variety of human nature. The tendency to run and shout and skylark on reaching dry ground again appears to be irresistible to this numerous class, and it is at Mrs. Runridge's door that we must lay the blame of submitting Windlecombe to a pestilent innovation. "Look ye," said the old ferryman from his seat in the boat, waving a scornful hand towards his garden, as I chanced along the river bank one fine Saturday afternoon. "'Twere me as painted un, and me as put un up, just for peace's sake, but I'd ha' taken and chucked un in the river if I'd only ha' knowed what sort of piece had come on it." A great white board reared itself on ungainly legs above the elder hedge of the garden, and on it, in huge irregular characters, appeared the single word "Teas." By the side of the ferry punt half a dozen town rowing boats lay moored, and from the green depths of the garden there arose a confusion of voices, shrill laughter, and an incessant clatter of crockery. I had hardly realised what it all meant when Mrs. Runridge showed a vast white apron and a hot perspiring face in the gateway. She bore down upon us with upraised hand, as though she intended bodily harm to one or both. "Here, Joe," cried she, giving the old ferryman a coin. "Change for half a sovereign, and sharp's the word. Try the Thatchers, or Mist Weevily, or belike. Don't sit staring there, loony. Dear o' Lord, was there ever such a man? And us all run purty nigh off our legses we be." "The 7th time," gasped Runridge, as we hurried together up the steep street. "Or like as not the 8th, I dunno. And it bean't as though I wanted money. Money! The bed bean't fit for Christian folk to sleep on, with the lumps in it. And to-morrow 'll be wuss, if 'tis fine. Lor, send a earthquake or Noah's flood or summat." When a naturally silent man attempts self-commiseration in words, his case is sure to be a desperate one. But we are all fated to share in his trouble now. On any fine Saturday or Sunday in the month, Runridge will be a familiar figure, hunting down from door to door the change that in villages is so scanty and so hard to discover. On Mondays we shall all suffer from our foolish kindness in allowing this reckless exportation of bullion. Only Susan Angel at the sweetstuff shop and her small customers will be unincommoded, for the handful of battered farthings that has served them as currency during whole decades past will be necessarily saved by its insignificance, and will remain, no doubt, in the village for service amidst generations yet unborn. But disturbing visitors to Windlecombe do not all come by the river. There is an iniquitous job-master in Stavisham who has long had the village in his evil eye, and at intervals, fortunately rare, he descends upon us with charabancs drawn by 3 horses and filled with heterogeneous human gleanings, the flotsam and jetsam of holiday land strayed for the day into Stavisham from contiguous seaside towns. They come in families, in amorous couples, in collective friendships of each sex and every number and age. They bring baskets of provisions, cameras, balls wherewith to play rounders on the green, and of musical instruments many weird kinds, concertinas, mouth organs, babies, and often yapping terriers that set all our own dogs frantic on their chains. An altruist whose convictions have grown up amidst the quiet, slow neighbourliness of the country never finds his principles less easy of application than when he must attune himself to the holiday moods of people escaped from the town. There is no harm in all the shouting and laughter and fatuous horseplay. Inebriety is practically extinct among those who make summer the season and the country the scene of their year's brief merrymaking, and yet it all seems mistaken, reprehensible, on the same principle that a blunder is worse than a crime. It is futile to tell him so, unless he already knows it, and then it is equally unnecessary. But when the day tripper learns to enjoy himself on the green countryside, in the true spirit for which the sun was made to shine and the flowers to grow, he will have found the philosopher's stone that is to change not merely lead and iron, but time and life themselves into gold. On most mornings in August, the more careful of us will go about thrusting greasy paper scraps out of sight under bushes, flicking the incongruous yellow of banana peel into obscure corners, lamenting stripped boughs, and marvelling at nosegays thrown heedlessly away, as if the joy of them had lain in the mere plucking. But all the strange folk that use the village for their pleasuring at this time do not leave these unlovely tokens behind them. Only yesterday, as I sat on the edge of the old worked-out riverside chalk pit here, whence you have a view north and south of the glittering water for miles, there came a new sound in the air, and I must throw aside my sheaf of galley proofs to listen. The sound came from the river, and was still afar off. Many voices were joined in singing one of the old catch songs which go round a circle of 3 or 4 phrases, and to which there is never an end until you make an end of its beginning in slow time. The sweet medley grew louder and clearer, and presently there was united to it the rhythmic plash of oars. A great tarry old sea-boat came round the water's bend, holding a party of a dozen or so. At last the labouring craft and the music came to a halt together, and the singers clambered ashore. I should have forgotten all about them now, for they soon passed out of sight amidst the waterside foliage. But as I was coming homeward up the village street, I heard the voices again, and there, under the 7 Sisters on the green, the little company was standing together, singing, apparently for their own solace and delight. It was a strange thing, here in unemotional England, and many of the village folk had been drawn wonderingly to their doors. Yet the singers did not seem to remark this, nor to regard their action as anything out of the common. For, the song finished, they broke into several parties and sauntered on, talking quietly amongst themselves, as if to make music were part of the daily conversation of their lives. All that afternoon, from the quiet of my garden, I heard the voices at intervals, and from different points about the village, near and far. Once I saw the party right at the top of Windle Hill, strolling about in 2s and 3s, looking like foraging crows on the heights. After a while I saw them get together in a little circle, and then, right at the ear's tip, I could just catch the higher notes of their singing, a strange wild song, much like the song of the larks that must be contending with them up there against the blue sky. The last I saw of this mysterious company was at sunset, from my perch over the chalk pit again. They had already embarked when I arrived, and had got their little ship well under way. The oars were dipping steadily to the same old catch song which had brought them hither. There was still a faint throbbing echo of white sand and grey sand upon the air long after the sun had plunged, and the pale half-moon was beginning to enter a timid silver protest against the lingering crimson in the sky. 2. Near upon half a century I have lived in the world, and cannot yet say of the wind whether I hate it or love it most. It is a dilemma that comes only to the dweller in the country, for in a town no sane man can be in two minds on the matter, with a careering mephitic dust choking up all organs of perception, and the risk of being cloven to the chine by a roof slate or lassoed by a loose electric wire. No one can think of wind, hot or cold, without heartily wishing it gone. But in the country, though for my old enemy, the north-east wind, I have nothing but fear and detestation at all seasons, warm gales, whether in winter or summer, come as often in friendly as in inimical guise. Like certain of the Hindu gods, the wind must be content to be treated according to the outcome of its activities, and receive laudation or revilement as this prove fair or foul. All through to-day the south-west wind has been volleying up the Coombe, and everywhere in the village there has been a hubbub of slamming doors and rattling casements, and the flack and clutter of linen drying on the garden lines. People fought their way step by step down the hill against the wind, and tripped lightly up it, the oldest and feeblest forced into a smart jog-trot. Aprons were blown over faces, and hats snatched off at corners. The trees overshadowing the village have been lashing together and roaring out a deep continuous song. The three thatchers on the inn sign, each with a gilded hod of straw, have been flashing signals up to my window every time the sun broke through the flying storm rack, and 100 times in the long day some riding witch of a rain cloud has tried to drench us, but each time the south-west gale has seized it by the tattered skirts and chivied it away over the hills before it could shed a dozen drops. But it has been a good wind all through, and fine heartening weather, and I have been glad to be abroad in it whenever I could spare or steal an hour. Said the old vicar, as we climbed up Windle Hill together this morning, his long white beard flowing out before him as he lay back on the blast, "I know what you would have done if I had let you choose the way. You would have struck deep into the woods like the butterflies, and missed all the healthy buffeting of it. But there is only one place for a man to-day, and that is on the open down. It never pays in the long run in life to study how to keep out of the way of hard knocks." The sunshine raced ahead of us, vaulted the hilltop, and was gone. A scatter of warm rain drove out of the grey heaven. I turned up my coat collar just in time to intercept the returning sun. "True," said I, "but the good of hard knocks depends not on their frequency, but on the profit you extract from them. I get and keep designedly as much of this as I can, so a little goes a long way with me, and I love the quiet and the stillness of the deep wood when the wind is roaring out in the open. If we had gone there to-day, we should have found the rose-bay willow herbs in full bloom, and more butterflies upon them than you could find in a week elsewhere. Besides, the ups in life are just as good for one as the downs. I can admire the old Scotch pine that clings to the bare hilltop through a century of winter storms, but I must not be inconsiderate of the lilies." The old Windlecombe vicar has a way of dealing with notions of this kind which is good for his hearer, whether he allow himself convinced or consider his dignity affronted. He ventilates such ideas as he would let light into a room by dashing a rough hand through the dust-grimed window. It is a method unpicturesque and often brutal, but effective and salutary in the main. I owe him gratefully many a pretty rainbow bubble of conceit exploded. "Pluck your head out of the sand," quoth he, "for your ragged hinder parts are visible to all the world of honest eyes. The pine and the lily are not choosing creatures. To them is their environment allotted, but to you is given the wilful fashioning of it. A man may be either gold or iron, made either for beauty or for use, but the one will not decorate, nor the other uphold the world, if he shirk the fires that must first refine or temper him. So away with your foolish Sahara tricks, and get on with the work the moment brings you." By this he meant I was to look about me, and tell him what I saw as we went along, a duty in which I was too often an unintentional malingerer. "Yesterday a Londoner was in the village," I told him for a start, "and he was scoffing at our downs. 'Where,' said he, 'are the green highlands of Sussex I've read so much about? Why, the hills are not green but brown.' And it was quite true at this season, and from his standpoint down in the valley. Up here we can see what gives the downs their rich bronze colour in summer time. From below they looked parched and sunburnt, as though nothing could grow for the heat and drought. But now I can see that the general brown tone is really a mingling of 1,000 living hues. Looking straight down as you walk, the turf is as green as ever it was, but a dozen paces onward all this fresh verdure is lost under the greys and drabs of the seeding grass heads. Then again, the brown colour is due just as much to the blending of all other colours that the eye separates at a close view, but confuses from afar. We are walking on a carpet of flowers. We cannot avoid trampling them if we are to set foot to the ground at all. Yellow goat's beard and vetchling, and the little trefoil with the blood-red tips to its petals, and golden hawkweed everywhere. For blues there are millions of plantains, and sheepsbit and harebells, and the wild thyme purples half the hillside, making the bright carmine of the orchids brighter still wherever it blows. But I have not reckoned in half the flowers that—" "Hold enough! I'm sick of your Londoner, and of every human being for the moment. Listen to the free, glorious wind. Down in the valley there, we always think of the wind as a creature with a voice, something striding through the sky and calling as it goes. But up here we know that it is the earth that calls. Hark to it, swishing and surging and sighing for miles round. The sound is never overhead on these treeless wastes, but always underfoot. You keep head and shoulders up in the soundless sunshine, and walk in a maelstrom. Did you ever think that the larks always sing in the midst of silence, no matter how hard the wind blows? Those are George Artlett's sheep we are coming to, are they not? I ought to know the old dog's talk." I scanned the hills about me, but could see no sign of sheep, shepherd, or dog. But as we drew to the edge of the wide plateau we were traversing, and got a view down into the steep coombe beyond, there, sure enough, were all three. The sheep, just growing artistically presentable after their June shearing, were scattered over the deep bottom, quietly nibbling at the turf. Far below, in the shadow of a single stunted hawthorn, sat young George Artlett scribbling on his knee. No doubt Rowster had been lying by his master's side until our shadows struck sheer down upon him from the brink of the hill, but now he was up and pricking his ears sharply in our direction, growling menaces and wagging a welcome at one and the same time. I gave the Reverend what I saw in few words. To my surprise he began to descend the steep hillside. "After all," said he, "George Artlett and I never really fell out, but we agreed to differ, and that is the most fatal, most lasting disagreement of all. I should have known better. I think I'll risk a hand to him again." As we clambered down the precipitous slope into the shelter of the coombe, the wind suddenly stopped its music in our ears. There fell a dead calm about us. At the bottom we seemed to be walking between two widely separated yet almost perpendicular cliffs of green, with a great span of blue sky far above, across which the heavy cumuli raged unceasingly. George Artlett got to his feet at our approach, thrust his paper into his pocket, and gravely clawed off his old tarpaulin hat. He took the hand held out to him with wonder and a little hesitation. "And how fares the good work, George?" Artlett was silent a moment. He tried to read the sightless eyes. "Shepherdin', sir. 'Tis allers slow going, but going all the time. We did famous with the wool, and—" "George, leave the wool alone. You know what I mean." George Artlett swung round on his heel and swung back again. He counted the fingers on his gnarled hand slowly, one by one. "Be it priest to lost runagate, or be it man to man?" he asked, looking up suddenly. "It is just one child in the dark way, putting forth hand to another. For to the best of us, George, comradeship can be no more than a heartening touch, and sound of a footstep going a common road, and the voice of a friend. Do you see a light at the end of your path?" "Aye, I do that." "Look closer. Is not the light just the shine of a beautiful face, very grave and sorrowful, but with a great joy beginning to spread over it, and—" Though the deep voice stemmed on in the sunny quiet of the coombe, I could distinguish the words no longer, for something that was by no means part of me, but of a more delicate nurture, had set my feet going against my will. I was half-way down the long alley of the coombe before I stopped to wait for the old vicar, and then, looking backward, I fell to staring with all my eyes. "Reverend," said I, after he had rejoined me, and we had walked on together in silence for a minute or two, "I wish you could see what is before me now." I had brought him out of his reverie with a jerk. "Well, on with it." "I see a green sunlit space, with the shadow of an old hawthorn upon it, and in the shadow I see two men kneeling, bareheaded, their faces turned up to the sky, and with all my heart I wish there were a third with them. But there is not another fit for such company, to my certain knowledge, within 10,000 miles." He seemed to weigh his reply before he uttered it, but "You're a good fool," said he, "and I love you. And there were three there, nay, a fourth, all the time." End of section 16.
Please subscribe to update new videos. Please share and like if you enjoyed the video. Thanks so much.